Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Abigail Miller sat at her desk with her sister Janice beside her, both eagerly anticipating an evening that promised to be unforgettable. Abigail had planned such a cunning prank that she was certain people would be talking about it for years to come. Janice, who had always appreciated well-executed practical jokes, had been invited specifically to witness the event. The clock read 8:30, and they knew that the live stream from Michael and Norma Garcia's house was about to start. Earlier that morning, Michael had dropped a cryptic hint during a phone conversation, telling Abigail that something spectacular was in store, and he promised to send a link to the show later. Michael was one of Peter's best friends, and every Monday their childhood group gathered for poker night. This core group, Michael, Peter, Benny, Scarrow, and Paul, had been inseparable since kindergarten, and they had all decided to settle in the same town. Most were already married and had children. Peter and Abigail had 2 kids, Jenny and Mark. Benny and his wife Angela didn't have children yet. Paul had recently become a father. His wife Wilma had given birth to their baby just 2 months ago. Michael and Norma had 2 sons, Ben and Max, who were already asleep upstairs by the time poker started. Every week, poker nights rotated between friends' houses, with the hostess playing the role of a gracious host, while the other wives stayed home with their children. However, on Thursdays, the wives had their own gatherings. Thanks to the long-standing friendship between their husbands, the wives had also become close friends. On Thursdays, they indulged in various hobbies, ranging from crafts to book clubs. That evening, Angela Scarrow sat alone with her tablet in hand, eagerly awaiting Michael's new prank. Having grown up with 4 brothers, she had loved practical jokes since childhood and hoped that this one would be filled with good-natured fun. At exactly 8:30, the broadcast from Michael and Norma's house was set to begin. Wilma Getchell, utterly exhausted, clicked on the link Michael had sent her. She was sitting at her kitchen table, with her laptop open beside her, and on the baby monitor screen, her son, Paul Jr., slept peacefully. The last 8 weeks had been tough for her. Wilma was almost sure she had postpartum depression. She hadn't been sleeping much, and when Paul was home, his help left much to be desired, leaving Wilma to handle everything on her own. She considered closing her laptop and going to bed, but her curiosity got the better of her. As 8:30 approached, the live stream from Michael and Norma's house was about to start. Meanwhile, Norma's parents, Betty and Albert Jones, had also received an invitation to watch the show. Michael had sent them the same link, knowing how much they adored him. Betty and Albert were thrilled that Michael had entered their daughter's life and brought stability to Norma's once chaotic existence. In her younger years, Norma had been wild and restless, always at the center of parties and rebellions, and her parents feared she would never settle down. But since meeting Michael 10 years ago, everything had changed. Now, as a mother of 2 and a devoted wife, Norma had become the woman her parents had always dreamed she'd be. That evening, as they prepared for the April Fool's joke, they eagerly awaited what Michael had up his sleeve this time. With growing anticipation, Albert opened 2 bottles of beer, handing one to Betty as she made some popcorn. Their son Jerry connected the broadcast to their large TV, and the family settled in front of the screen, ready for the show. Finally, the live stream began, and the participants' recordings were turned on, as Michael had requested, to capture the moment. His specific request for recording made them think the prank would be monumental. The live feed came to life, showing the usual jokes and conversations between the 4 poker players gathered at Michael's house. The poker table was ready, drinks were flowing, and the game was in full swing. At exactly 8:30, the screens of all the viewers lit up, showing Michael's living room, where the men were playing cards and laughing. About 10 minutes into the game, a voice from the kitchen interrupted, the voice of Norma, announcing that snacks and more beer would be ready soon. For some viewers, the screen split, showing both the living room and the kitchen. For others, the broadcast focused solely on the kitchen. There, Norma calmly poured chips into a bowl and filled 4 glasses with beer. Everything seemed normal until she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small packet. With skillful precision, Norma poured the packet's contents into one of the glasses. The substance dissolved instantly, and the foam on top concealed any trace of tampering. The viewers, now fully captivated by what was happening, began speculating about what was in the packet and who would drink from that glass. Albert, grinning, bet Betty that the unlucky recipient would be Paul. Meanwhile, Janice nudged Abigail, convinced that her husband Peter would be the one to take the fateful sip. The crowd was stunned when Michael Garcia appeared with a beer in his hand. This unexpected turn of events only added to the mystery of what was happening. Why did Michael and Norma give him the contents of the mysterious package? It was clear that the two were plotting something together. The explanation had to be much more complex. Perhaps the couple had set up cameras all over the house to record a prank. Then Michael sent a link, further intensifying the strange atmosphere. Something about the situation felt off. Soon, Michael's eyes began to feel heavy, his body relaxed, and his eyelids involuntarily started to droop. The audience was utterly confused. Could it be that the other participants were preparing to prank Michael himself? Maybe they were going to shave half his hair off. But that seemed unlikely. More likely, this was a prank within a prank. Perhaps Norma had accidentally given the beer to the wrong person, and Michael wasn't the intended recipient. The viewers couldn't tear their eyes away from the screens, mesmerized by what was unfolding. As Michael's head slowly drooped onto the card table, his grip loosened, and the cards slipped from his hands, leaving the audience breathless. The cards gently floated to the floor. Then, suddenly, a loud voice boomed through the speakers in every living room. "Finally! I've been waiting for this for a whole month. All right, folks, it's time to head to the bedroom. Time is running out." Abigail Miller turned to her sister Janice, exchanging a bewildered glance. Janice mirrored her confusion. Angela Scarrow's face tensed as she grabbed her phone, while Wilma Getchell was entirely focused on the baby monitor, barely noticing as little Paul Jr. stirred in his sleep. Betty and Albert felt uncomfortable but couldn't look away from the screen. Those with split-screen functionality could see Michael unconscious at the card table, while the second screen showed the bedroom. For those without that feature, only the bedroom scene was visible, and it was quite a sight. Without hesitation, Norma, Peter, Benny, and Paul began undressing. Paul collapsed onto the bed, leaving his legs dangling off the edge. Norma quickly climbed on top of him, and what happened next left the audience completely shocked. There was no hesitation or preparation. One moment, it was an ordinary card game, and the next, Norma was intimately involved with Paul. The transition was so seamless that it was hard to believe this was their first time. Amazingly, the timing was perfect. The poker game had ended, and the lovers didn't have much time. But the suddenness of it all left everyone in shock. Janice clung to her sister Allison, who was sobbing uncontrollably. None of them could find the words to describe what they were feeling. Abigail, dazed, tried to process what she had just seen. She had always thought her marriage was perfect, and now it felt like her world was falling apart. Janice, too devastated to speak, remained silent. Meanwhile, Angela Scarrow was beside herself with rage. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed her older brother Jeff. When he answered, she wasted no time. "That idiot, my husband, is right now in bed with that tramp," she snapped sharply. Jeff's reaction was calm. It didn't surprise him. He and his brothers had never liked Benny Scarrow. Angela, the youngest in the family, had always been their little sister. Jeff, the eldest, along with Jason, James, and Jared, had always taken special care of her. Their father had died of cancer when Angela was just 8. His last request to his sons was to always take care of their mother and sister. Jeff had immediately dropped out of school and taken a job in construction to support the family. At 18, he became a carpenter's apprentice and sent home every penny. Jason followed in his footsteps, leaving school at 17 to help on the construction site. When James turned 17, he did the same. When it was Jared's turn, his older brothers insisted that he stay in school. Jared was the smartest of them, and they wanted him to earn a degree in engineering. After his graduation, they planned to open a contracting business together. By the time Angela married Benny, the brothers' construction and design firm was thriving. Jared was still living with their mother, while the others had married and moved out. The family remained close, but Benny, though tolerated for Angela's sake, had never won the approval of her brothers. Benny had a tendency to overindulge in alcohol, and during his drunken outbursts, he often taunted Angela, saying, "I spit on your brothers." Angela loved both Benny and her brothers deeply, and despite these hurtful words, she believed their marriage was strong. Of course, there were occasional tensions, but Angela didn't think anything could destroy them. It's remarkable how quickly love can become unrecognizable. Meanwhile, Jeff was on the phone with his brothers, unaware of the storm brewing in the Garcia household. Wilma Getchell was on the verge of tears. Weeks of relentless depression, exhaustion, and sharp hormonal swings had turned her into a shadow of her former self, drained and sleepless. She slowly approached her son Paul Jr.'s room, picked him up in her arms, and silently carried him downstairs. Once they were down, she fastened him into the car seat and, without a word, headed to the car. In the living room, Betty and Albert, who had been watching TV, quietly turned it off. Their faces reflected a heavy sadness that needed no words. Albert got up from the couch, gently kissed Betty, and put on his coat before leaving the house. 20 minutes later, the chaos in the Garcia household had reached its peak. Norma had once again retreated into her usual cold and detached state, not even noticing that it was John, Michael's brother, who was standing by Benny's bedroom door, who was the first to notice. As Benny was processing what was happening, John entered the room, followed by a stern blonde woman who exuded an aura of professional authority. The noise in the room died down when she calmly said, "Could you stop?" Norma turned to her in confusion. "What's going on?" Her bewilderment was mirrored on Paul's face. "What the hell?" Paul began, but Peter, always quick to adapt, changed his reaction. "Who even is she?" The woman remained calm, taking 2 confident steps toward Norma. "Are you Norma Garcia?" she asked. Norma hesitated for a second, then nodded. The woman didn't flinch. "I'll take that as a yes. You have been officially served," she stated, quickly snapping a photo to document the moment. It was one of the strangest shots of her career. Without further explanation, the woman left the room. In the silence, John's commanding voice rang out, "I have power of attorney from my brother. Since you've stripped him of his legal rights, I'm here to act on his behalf. You need to leave his house, immediately." Norma opened her mouth to protest, but John's piercing glare silenced her. His voice was filled with contempt. "Especially you. You're just trash. My brother loved you, and this is how you repay him? Get out." At that moment, Benny realized this was his chance to escape. Frantically gathering his clothes, Benny dashed downstairs, hoping to finish dressing in the card room. But as soon as he entered, he was met by Jeff, Jason, James, and Jared. Benny froze in place. Jeff was the first to step forward, delivering a powerful punch straight to Benny's jaw. The blow instantly broke it. "That's for breaking your vows," Jeff growled. Benny collapsed to the floor in agony. Before he could react, Jason grabbed his hand and yanked off his wedding ring. Then, with a swift and precise motion, Jason broke Benny's finger. Through the haze of pain, Benny barely heard Jason's cold remark, "Maybe now you'll understand what loyalty means." Before he could process what was happening, Benny was dealt a brutal blow to the groin by James. James didn't hold back. The steel toe of his boot struck with such force that Benny immediately lost consciousness. He didn't hear James mutter, "Let this remind you to stay faithful." By the time Jared approached, Benny was already unconscious. "You always said you spit on us. Now we spit on you, Benny." Paul entered the room just as Jared was fastening his pants, trying to slip past the brothers unnoticed. He managed to sneak through, his eyes fixed on the floor, but he didn't see Wilma standing in the doorway. Fueled by adrenaline, rage, and hormones, Wilma gently set down the car seat and lunged at Paul. She became a whirlwind of fury, hitting, kicking, and yanking his hair. Her nails scratched his face with wild, desperate energy. Paul, stunned, could barely defend himself. After several minutes of Wilma's furious assault, Paul finally managed to break free and flee into the night. Moments later, Peter Miller came downstairs, completely unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. Peter's brothers had witnessed Wilma's brutal attack on Paul and were now doing everything they could to help her calm down and pull herself together. Meanwhile, Peter, hoping to slip away unnoticed, was already at the door when his phone vibrated in his pocket. The name on the screen, Janice, his sister-in-law. Her voice sliced through the air, sharp and filled with hatred. "Don't you dare show up here tonight, you pitiful excuse for a man. You destroyed my sister. Her lawyer will be in touch with you soon, so get ready. Now disappear and I hope you rot." Elsewhere, Norma was alone with John in a room that had become eerily quiet. To her, the brief affair with one of Michael's friends seemed like a deserved break from her role as the perfect wife. For 10 long years, she had been a loyal, devoted wife and mother. But lately, memories of her wilder days kept resurfacing, tempting and calling her back. She convinced herself that one harmless fling would help her feel like the devoted wife and mother she once was. Benny was an easy target for her plan. He had always wanted her, and she knew it well, just like she knew that almost all of Michael's friends felt the same way about her. The first time went smoothly, but instead of satisfaction, Norma felt she needed more. Her desire overpowered her reason, and before she knew it, she repeated the affair 3 more times, including today. After the last time, Michael started asking her uncomfortable and suspicious questions. That should have been her signal to stop, but the temptation was too strong. She couldn't resist the pull. Norma was jolted out of her thoughts by John's voice, breaking the silence. "Get out, you treacherous cheater. Michael's lawyer will be in touch with you." Stunned, Norma quickly dressed and threw her things into a suitcase. As she was leaving what had once been her home, she was shocked to see her father waiting for her at the door. Albert's gaze pierced her, full of contempt. "You had everything and you threw it all away for a fling. Get in the car, fool." John, on the other hand, felt only pity for his brother Michael. "What a disgrace," he muttered under his breath. He glanced at the hidden camera in the corner of the bedroom, the very one he had helped Michael install. That camera had broadcast the entire humiliating scene for everyone to see. Michael believed this would make the upcoming divorce process a bit easier for everyone. The recording was just to expose Norma for what she was. Norma never suspected that things would spiral out of control this way. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. At the age of only 50, Robert Taylor Smith, better known as Rob Rodriguez, passed away, leaving behind a wife and 3 daughters. The family gathered in the lawyer's office to hear the contents of Rob's will. The 4 women sat around a large table while the lawyer's assistant quietly placed cups of coffee in front of them and took a seat next to a box of tissues, anticipating they might soon be needed. Lawyer Daniel Garcia opened a folder, pulling out several sheets of paper to begin reading Rob's personal message. "This is the real Rob Rodriguez," Garcia said, holding up the handwritten pages for all to see. Rob wanted his final words to be written by himself. The official will has already been submitted to the court, but he asked me to read these handwritten notes to you first. There are messages here that are not included in the official version. The lawyer cleared his throat, took a sip of water, and began to read. "If you are hearing this, it means I am no longer with you. My friend and lawyer, Daniel Garcia, helped ensure that my family would be taken care of. But before getting to those details, let me tell you a story that my daughters might not know. When I first fell in love with your mother, Margaret." Rob's voice seemed to resonate from the pages, and Margaret couldn't help but smile. "I was not yet 25 years old. My parents thought I was too young and advised me to wait, but Margaret and I were inseparable. I was already receiving funds from the family trust and was confident I could support us. We saw no reason to delay our happiness. Eventually, after some resistance, my parents agreed to our wedding when we told them Margaret was pregnant with our first daughter, Poppy. but my mother insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect the family assets. The agreement stated that Margaret would have no claims to the trust funds designated for me and our future children. Margaret, ever trusting, signed the papers without studying them too carefully. She believed in me, and that's how she always was. But everything worked out. We had a good marriage. I was happy for the past 25 years. Our family grew quickly. After Poppy came Mia, and then Victoria completed our trio. I adored my daughters. They filled my life with joy. But Margaret thought 3 children were more than enough. She would joke that I spent too much time with the girls. Yes, your mother was jealous of you 3. Rob's humor even touched his final words, prompting a few smiles around the table. Although I wanted a son, Margaret and I agreed that our family was complete. I even offered to have a vasectomy, but Margaret wouldn't allow it. She was convinced it would lead to impotence and didn't want to take the risk, he added ironically, despite the farewell message. So we stopped at 3. At 49, I was diagnosed with acute leukemia. The doctors said it was rare for my age and the prognosis was grim. With my parents gone and no siblings, I had no close relatives for a bone marrow transplant. My rare blood type, AB, and unique white blood cell composition made finding a donor difficult. My wonderful daughters, despite the slim chances, volunteered to be tested. Unfortunately, none of them were a match. Margaret tried to prepare them for disappointment, advising them not to even start the tests, but they insisted, wanting to help in any way possible. As expected, the results confirmed that none of them could be donors. I reached out to specialists worldwide in search of a miracle, but we never found one. At this point, the lawyer paused, allowing the weight of the story to settle in the room. He took another sip of water before continuing. But instead of a miracle, we found something else. One of the doctors I grew close to during treatment noticed something odd in the DNA results. Not only were my daughters not matches as donors, but they weren't full sisters to each other either. They shared the same mother, but each had a different father. The room fell silent. Garcia set the paper aside for a moment, letting the words sink in. The daughters, stunned, exchanged glances before turning to their mother all at once. "Mom?" all 3 asked at once, their voices filled with disbelief. "You cheated on Dad?" Poppy asked, her voice trembling with shock. "No, of course not," Margaret exclaimed, her face pale. "There must be some mistake in the test results." Garcia continued reading the document, maintaining his usual calm demeanor. Everything happened right on schedule, just as expected. Despite my assurances that a mistake had been made, the doctor recommended the only way to confirm the results, a DNA test for Margaret. If there had been an error in the lab, the test would have shown that she wasn't the biological mother of our children. I quietly took her hairbrush, and the subsequent DNA results confirmed what I didn't want to believe. Margaret was, without a doubt, the mother of our daughters. He paused, waiting for a collective gasp, then smiled as tissues began to be passed around the room. Over the next week, I secluded myself in the hospital, claiming I needed to undergo tests related to my immune system, which kept me isolated. It was unbearable to come to terms with the fact that my beloved wife had never truly belonged to me, even before we exchanged vows. I had to face the bitter truth that I had been deceived throughout our entire marriage. Her fear of my vasectomy suddenly made sense. It had nothing to do with preventing an accidental pregnancy. The truth was that my operation couldn't possibly affect her ability to get pregnant again. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It didn't take long for him to find out that while I was confined to my hospital bed, Margaret had been seeing several men. The scale of her infidelity was far greater than I could have imagined. However, despite all this, I had to confront the undeniable fact: my daughters, in every important sense, were still my daughters. They loved me, and I loved them more than anything in the world. They had no idea about the true circumstances of their birth. If they knew, they would never have agreed to the DNA test. I loved them, and they loved me. That will never change. I will remain their father and protector, no matter what. Their education funds were already secured, so I knew they would be financially safe. As I reached for the phone to call my friend Daniel Garcia to start the divorce process, the absurdity of my situation hit me like a brick. I was terminally ill. The likelihood of me surviving long enough to finalize the divorce was minimal. Even if I survived, all I would achieve would be funding my wife's future affairs. Divorce wasn't the solution. I needed Margaret to face the consequences, not benefit from our failed marriage. The private investigator continued to dig into her past, speaking with her acquaintances and examining her financial records, especially her credit reports. That's when he found the gold mine. She regularly visited a small, unremarkable restaurant located about 15 miles from here. The only notable feature of the establishment was the adjacent motel. The staff, including the motel manager, were well aware of Margaret's frequent visits and her numerous companions. The motel manager even suggested that Margaret might have been working as an escort. The detective obtained surveillance footage from the motel and identified the license plates of her lover's cars. Some of these men had no shame in bragging about their exploits over drinks, and it was in one of those conversations that I learned the most painful detail. Margaret only used the motel when she knew I might return home. At other times, her lovers comfortably settled into our home, sometimes even in the guest rooms, while my daughters were upstairs, unaware of what was happening below. One of her lovers, Callum Wilson, smirked as he recounted the story of how I came home unexpectedly one day. In a panic, almost comically, he climbed out the window while my wife threw his clothes onto the lawn. He fled, and Margaret hastily erased all traces of his presence while my daughters distracted me downstairs. My daughters, unwitting accomplices in their mother's betrayal, helped her hide the truth. Victoria cried out, "Dad knew!" Through tears, she confessed, "He knew we were protecting Mom." Tears flowed freely as tissues were passed around again. Garcia continued reading, his voice steady. "This was the unvarnished truth of my 25-year marriage. There's nothing more to say, except to explain my reaction and, most importantly, to state that I hold no ill will towards my daughters. I genuinely believe that they kept their mother's secrets out of love for her, trying to preserve our family. That is why, with the help of Garcia and my financial advisors, I have created a trust fund for them. It is large enough to maintain their lifestyle and secure their future, even for their own children. They are also the sole beneficiaries of the family trust, which I now manage as the sole trustee. Regardless of what happens between Margaret and me, my daughters will be provided for, now and always. The established trust contains a set of strict conditions similar to those outlined in the family trust. If any beneficiary, including my daughters and their descendants, fails to comply with these conditions, they will be irrevocably excluded from both trusts. The first and most important rule is that any form of communication with Margaret, my widow, will be considered a violation. This applies to direct contact, communication through third parties, or any form of correspondence, written, verbal, or digital. The prohibition extends to gestures of goodwill, financial assistance, or support, even if conveyed through intermediaries. Furthermore, if the widow attempts to contact any of the beneficiaries, this will also be considered a violation. Therefore, all beneficiaries are advised to completely avoid her. The third condition states that if any assets, property, or funds are transferred to the widow by a beneficiary, that individual and their descendants will be permanently excluded from the trust. Additionally, a sum of $300,000 will be paid to anyone who reports a violation that leads to a beneficiary's disqualification. As a final test of loyalty, even Margaret herself can claim this reward if she reports a violation by her children or initiates contact with them. What will prevail, I wonder, maternal devotion to her children or her desire to claim $300,000? If all current beneficiaries are disqualified, the assets will be transferred to tertiary beneficiaries, charitable organizations specified in the trust documents. The term Margaret in these documents refers not only to my widow, but also applies to all former beneficiaries excluded from the trust. Thus, any communication with a disqualified former beneficiary will also be considered a violation of the trust. The family trust attorney, Daniel Garcia, has been appointed to manage the newly created trust, which is now officially called the Robert Rodriguez Revenge Trust. All inquiries regarding this new structure should be directed to him. Garcia took a sip of water, surveying the room full of women sitting in shock, like deer caught in headlights. Rob Rodriguez also wanted to remind everyone that each of you can claim a reward, and naturally, the fewer the beneficiaries, the larger the share of the trust's funds. With a smirk, Garcia continued reading the document. To create this revenge trust, nearly all my assets were transferred into it with the enthusiastic approval of my loving wife. At this moment, Margaret screamed in fury, vehemently denying the accusation. "I never agreed to this! It's all a lie!" she shouted. Completely unfazed, Garcia picked up a remote and pressed a button. A large screen in the room lit up, showing a video of Margaret sitting with the firm's notary, a stack of documents in front of her. The notary explained that each document required her signature next to Robert Rodriguez's. She asked Margaret if she had reviewed the documents, to which Margaret impatiently replied that she had, and immediately began signing each one. The notary asked again if she was sure she had read everything, to which Margaret snapped, "Of course I have. Do you think I'm an idiot?" The video showed the notary rolling her eyes, lifting each signed document to the camera. When the notary asked again, "There's a lot of legal paperwork here. Are you sure you don't want to consult your attorney?" Margaret rolled her eyes once more and sharply replied, "I'm perfectly capable of understanding what I'm signing." Once the last document was signed, the video ended. Garcia turned off the screen and calmly stated, "The documents you signed and confirmed your understanding of were the very ones that officially transferred nearly all of Robert Rodriguez's assets, including his real estate, into the Revenge Trust." Returning to Robert's statement, Garcia continued reading while Margaret began gasping for breath. "Despite all this, I have decided to be generous toward my widow. From the assets remaining outside the trust, she will receive an inheritance of $25,000. That is $1,000 for each year of our marriage, which, given the circumstances, is far more than those years were worth." Margaret felt her chest tighten. $25,000? She blurted, her voice trembling with disbelief. "We were worth millions, even without the trust. How am I supposed to survive on $25,000 a year?" Garcia, the lawyer, remained calm, leaning back in his chair. "Rob Rodriguez was surprised when you decided to put everything into the trust for your daughters," he noted in an even tone. "But that's exactly what you did." Margaret's eyes narrowed, and she clenched her fists. Garcia casually picked up the remote. "Would you like to watch the video again?" he asked with a slight smirk. "Perhaps you still don't fully understand. It's not $25,000 a year. That $25,000, that's your entire inheritance." It felt like the walls were closing in on Margaret as she stood, her fiery gaze locked on Garcia. "This can't be true. If you think I'm just going to sit back and let this happen, you're gravely mistaken. I will find a way to get that money, even if he put it in a trust." Garcia's smile widened. "You won't. You're not part of the trust, and the prenuptial agreement ensures you won't see a cent. It's airtight." Margaret's lips curled into a sneer. "That prenup only applies to the Smith Trust," she declared confidently. Garcia remained unfazed. "Incorrect," he replied calmly. "You should review the document. The Smith Trust isn't even mentioned. It covers all of Rob Rodriguez's assets placed in any trust." Margaret's face twisted in shock. "In any trust?" she echoed. "That's right. Even the Revenge Trust," Garcia said, his smile never fading. "You were present when it was established. Want me to show you the video again?" Margaret let out a bitter laugh and reached for her bag. "We'll see how this looks in court." She turned sharply, throwing over her shoulder. "Girls, we're leaving." Her daughters hesitated, nervously exchanging glances, looking between their mother and the lawyer. Garcia leaned back in his chair, his smile broadening even more. "You can go with her if you want," he said coldly. "But know this, the trust's conditions don't take effect until tomorrow. Your father left a final message. Despite everything, he loved you and forgave you. But your mother, he wanted her to be left penniless and alone, and the only way to ensure that is through you. The girls turned pale as Garcia continued. Your father raised you as his own and trusted you to carry out his final wishes. Later, Garcia stood by the window of his office, watching the girls gather around their mother in the parking lot. Their heated argument was faintly audible in the distance. He couldn't help but recall his last conversation with Rob Rodriguez. Even in his final days, weakened by illness, Rob had smiled with a strange sense of satisfaction. I almost regret that I won't be around to see the fallout, he mused. I bet at least 2 of them will be disqualified within a year, and 1 will get everything. Garcia remembered how Rob's face lit up with a grim sense of humor. Will 2 of them lose it all? Or will 1 manage to take it all? Who knows, but it'll be fun to watch it unfold. Rob had erupted in a fit of coughing, laughing between ragged breaths. Do you think we stand a chance of disinheriting all 3? Garcia had shrugged. I can add a clause excluding them for infidelity or marriage. If they take after their mother, they don't stand a chance. Rob had smirked, mimicking a Star Trek captain. Make it so. And so, it was done. Before his death, Rob had given Garcia one final instruction. Make sure the private investigators and charities know about the $300,000 reward for exposing any actions that could disqualify them. They'll be watching my daughters. 2 weeks later, after signing the revised trusts, Rob Rodriguez passed away. A faint smile still lingered on his face. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.